You may be wondering why I'm so much more trendy and expensive than I usually am right now. Or if you don't understand, get ready to. Today I'm talking about Girlsense.com, a defunct fashion boutique simulator and kids' social site. Girlsense's main sell was the incredibly robust fashion design simulator, which could be used to sell clothes in your own virtual fashion boutique. This system operated by altering a variety of simple clothes using a selection of graphic design tools. This allowed for a high degree of ingenuity and creative use of the prefabricated garments. For example, there weren't any hair options programmed into the designer, but that didn't stop anybody. Girlsense wasn't only a fashion design site, it was a pretty comprehensive social experience as well. It was designed so that if for some reason Girlsense was the only website you were allowed to use, you'd never want for any other website anyways. There were forums, direct messaging, basically Twitter, a load of non-fashion themed flash games, and a ton of other peripheral activities. Unfortunately, the majority of these features are now gone. I have Girlsense's oddly large YouTube fandom to thank for most of my primary source material that isn't from Internet Archive. This well-beloved fashion game has been closed for a bit over 10 years by now, and fans still are calling for its return to this day. Let's start from the very beginning as I explore what Girlsense.com is and why so many people miss it. I was surprised at the lack of modern discussion about Girlsense.com. It was a huge phenomenon in its time, and there's a lot of primary source footage on YouTube with a good amount of views. However, most new content I could find about this game were comments on old Girlsense media, mostly wishing for the site to be brought back. Girlsense.com was created by GTECO Limited, makers of KiddoNet, which was a chat, email, and gaming client for children. And boy, it had one hell of a UI. Several of the features on Girlsense were taken directly from the KiddoNet application, like the wishful thinking board. While many sources say that Girlsense launched in 2007, the Wayback Machine indicates that the site actually released in 2004, looking substantially different from the 2007 version. It seems to still have the fashion design tool, but many of the social elements and games are missing. All I have to go on are the archive pages because there's nothing from official or player sources from before 2007. Let's take a look. It's all very 2004 and not too many flash elements. I can view most of the homepage and most of the interactive elements work too. Not so much if I click the links, but I can't expect everything. Wait, what's this about a credit card? 1999? I was extremely surprised to learn that the original incarnation of the site was actually fully paywalled, $20 a year with a free trial period offered. One of the most cherished features of the game that I remember is that it had no paywall at all. The subscription element was extremely experimental and soon to be abandoned. I think it's safe to say that Girlsense.com was not a hit in this original release. I have to assume that Girlsense's URL convention, which includes premium on most pages, is a holdover from this early business model. GTECO was acquired by Microsoft in 2006, which directly precipitated the site's major overhaul into what most recognize as Girlsense.com. In 2007, the site experienced a major rebrand, lifting the paywall and adding a ton of new features, with GTECO now using the name StarNet Interactive. This is a promotional video from the official Girlsense YouTube channel, Girlsense Rocks, hosted by the site's fashion editor who identifies herself mononymously as Deborah.
I'm Deborah, Girlsense's fashion editor, and I'm here to answer all of your questions.
This delightfully low-quality video explores the site's main fashion design and social features. According to Deborah, there's enough content that you'll never be bored again. Their age demographic is described as mostly tweens and young teens, but that girls of all ages would be able to enjoy the creative gameplay. While I can't revisit the site to see how it holds up today, the appreciable amount of older teen and adult users indicates to me that it was still plenty engaging for adult audiences. The site is largely, albeit a bit brokenly, preserved on the Wayback Machine, and much of the site's non-flash features are still accessible. The site map provides me with a convenient guide of everything that was available at the time. Let's go through these in order. The first is the site's glorious crown jewel, the Fashion Design Studio. This was easily the most robust and impressive feature of the game, being an entire graphic fashion design client hosted in browser. While the tools were limited, it was a game for kids after all, you could achieve some incredibly cool effects by combining items and using different technical tricks to end up with an extremely elaborate final result. There are tons of tutorials on YouTube on how to make specific garments, often with different techniques used to achieve a similar final effect. If you wanted, you could spend hours learning how to use this now completely inaccessible design tool. Just like I did. This fashion design tool shared several features in common with actual graphic design clients. Advanced experience with Girlsense's in-game design tools would, for example, give its users a fairly comprehensive understanding of masking and Bezier curve pen tools, both of which are extremely useful concepts in practical graphic design. Moving on, the fashion design studio worked in tandem with the e-boutiques, which accounted for the interior design gameplay aspect of Girlsense. While the fundamental purpose of these e-boutiques were to advertise your items for sale or display your personal collection, the expansive creation tools could also be used for more creative or trollish ends. What survives to the present, however, are mostly just straightforward fashion boutiques. Like the Fashion Designer app, if you were knowledgeable and persistent enough with the software, you could achieve extremely elaborate final results. I can't do it. I can't do this hair anymore. The Girlsense Logo Maker was another in-browser design client, this time focused on creating a logo for your shop. Again, this was an example of Girlsense successfully integrating several real-world concepts in graphic design and brand development. Like the other creative programs on the site, you could choose from a list of pre-existing shapes and then combine them into your own original graphic. The next 4 links on the site map are all about the site's doll maker system, which operated both by sourcing clothes from user-generated fashion design studio creations, as well as offering specially designed items. Finally, there was the slideshow, which is basically just those memory slideshows but for your Girlsense outfits. The next portion of the site, titled Fashion Avenue, starts with 2 redundant links to the fashion design studio and e-boutiques, but follows with one of Girlsense's most interesting features, the ad place. In the ad place, users could purchase banner ads for the site using in-game currency, and would display in the site's UI alongside the paid sponsor ads. I remembered this feature as taking real-world money, but this seems to be wrong as the documentation indicates that these slots were sold using Girlsense. These banner ads were some of the most memorable parts of the site, and I think it was an extremely smart way to highlight the efforts of its user base and introduce even more practical marketing concepts to its young audience. The next link is to a social feature called Notes, which was a direct messaging client used to chat with your friends, send and receive hate messages, and engage in heavily censored cybering. The Girlsense fashion board is next and served as the site's forums. While it was named and intended to be a fashion discussion board, the fact that these were Girlsense's only forums naturally caused some topic drift. At the end of this list was Girlsense's only non-creation-based original game, Bad Hair Day. This was an exceedingly simple flash game where you popped falling bubbles, and the only game on the site that yielded G-Sense from winning. Farming on this game was the primary source of income for users who weren't able to figure out the nuances of making valuable items with the fashion designer. The next block of links covers several sponsored e-boutiques for all the product integrations that were going on at the time. The very 2000s list of properties and brands includes Camp Rock, MTV's The Hills, Claire's, Mud, and Becky Bones. I really wish I could still view these e-boutiques, but they're part of the fully unarchived Flash content. The salon hosted a number of the site's other flagship games which weren't nearly as well known or well documented as the fashion design studio. The Style and Stuff Manicure and Pedicure was exactly what it sounded like. 2 separate games to make a manicure and a pedicure. These games are archived on Flashpoint if you want to play them. These sound effects really take me back. Next was Makeup Girl and Makeover Girl, 2 fundamentally similar games. Makeup Girl was a somewhat unsettling makeup game, and Makeover Girl was its totally unplayable cousin that required you to upload a photo of your own face. I think I tried this once and was so repulsed by how it looked I never tried it again. I remember playing this first game a lot, but unfortunately there's extremely limited documentation of either of these games. The only video I could find on either one was the slideshow style video with a very distinct editorial style. The next chunk of links is labeled Connect and is largely filled with features ripped directly from other KiddoNet properties. Some of these links have no archival or screenshots and will be skipped. First are Girlsense groups, not dissimilar to the Facebook feature by the same name, and were special interest groups that members could join to talk about a specific topic or just for a more insular hangout. Clea's blog seemed to be an advice column and was available from the inception of the website, although there's no remaining documentation of this. Babbel was the site's self-contained social network and operated as a kind of cross between MySpace and Twitter, but simplified for kids, and was only for users age 13 and older. Hard to Get and Wishful Thinking were taken directly from KiddoNet, with the only change being the site title graphic. I have particularly fond memories of Wishful Thinking, which was a wish upon a star-themed message board where you typed in your wish onto a star and then sent it out into the screaming void. These wishes tended to come in 3 distinct flavors: generic, hilarious, and just extremely depressing. Hard to Get was specifically for notes to or about your crush, and oh, it left me a MIDI file. Let's see what it is. Polls was for, and you're not going to believe this one, polls. Let me knock out all the other KiddoNet derivatives. Crush Mail was a messaging system focused around sending a message to your crush. Did they know it was you? I never used this feature because it sounded mortifying. Emotinotes was for sending notes based around an animated emoticon. We've got some interesting options here. You have acne. I have a birthday. You need a haircut.
Among Us.
Graffiti Board, Jailsparks, and Comics all have the KiddoNet name in the URL but are inaccessible. KiddoNet itself is pretty poorly documented, so I'm not sure if these appeared in other properties. The KiddoNet edition of Jailsparks is backed up on Flashpoint. It's a very simple drawing program with shaded lines to give the appearance of a gel pen. I'm a little disappointed that these sparkles don't animate. I think I would like Jailsparks better if it wasn't so incredibly tiny. Some other notable pages from this tab include the Faceplace, which was used to generate user avatars. I remember having really mixed feelings about this avatar creator because while it was pretty fun to use and had a lot of options, I found it practically impossible to make something that looked even a little like me. This video is the only remaining documentation of the Girlsense ID cards feature and seems to share some similarities with those card pages that people make today. What? Is that trying to auto-suggest the next word? Yeah, I bet K-brosis was exactly what they were thinking. After Connect is GS Marketplace, which I'm a little surprised didn't appear in Fashion Avenue as they are directly related. The marketplace served numerous item auctions at any given time and were used to buy and sell the user-generated creations that were made on the fashion design studio. And what's this? Participate in real-time auction chats. Seems like something I'll have to get back to later on. The next batch of links take you to several direct downloads, to my delight. These are .widget files which run via the application Yahoo Widgets. The first one is a horoscope viewer, which is no longer actively hosted and so displays a no connection error instead of your horoscope. You can, however, look at all the zodiac icons. The second is a radio player, now also half broken, as the radio hosting site now leads to, this. Nothing to see here? Most of the UI is preserved and you can see which kind of stations were on offer. The last one is the only fully intact widget of the bunch, which is the Girlsense Tunes player. This simply played any music files or folders with music that were dragged and dropped into the player, and yep, works just fine. And plus you can choose between a bunch of different colors. If you download any of these, I would recommend the Tunes player. To be clear, due to the fact that this needs you to download the Yahoo Widgets app, I do not recommend downloading any of these. The final link is broken, but I suspect it wouldn't have made much of a difference as it's a widget for viewing your Girlsense account stats, so I think it would have been fully broken anyways. Fortunately, all these downloadables are documented on the official Girlsense channel. The final batch of links is the Games tab, which hosted Girlsense's eclectic and oddly gender-neutral collection of third-party created Flash games. I always thought this collection of games was a bit strange and poorly integrated, especially since only one of them yielded any in-game currency, so there was no incentive to play any of the others. There were dozens of games, and while I loved Flash games as a kid, I don't remember playing any of these. Wait, except for Balloons. Playing Balloons was a reward in and of itself. In 2008, StarNet was acquired by IAC, an Israeli tech company that owned properties like Zwinky, Cursormania, and Smiley Central. One interesting aspect about Girlsense.com was its inclusion of boy player profiles. Despite the name, Girlsense was not gender exclusive. I believe boy faces were added as an update to the Faceplace avatar maker shortly after the 2007 overhaul. The audience was very largely girls due to the site's subject matter, but this nod to inclusivity broadened the site's player base a bit. It's hard to say what was more common, boy accounts operated by boy players, or boy accounts operated by girl players. The fake boy was a critical part of the ecosystem in any girl's virtual world, whether they were actually represented in the in-game models or not. While I suspect a few of these kids ended up being latently transgender, more often than not the fake boy was just there because someone had to do it. It was silently understood that a niche had to be filled. One player had to be the one that all the others begged to date them. It was a task solemnly fulfilled by countless little girls over the course of the 2000s, and I suspect it still is today. It's the online equivalent of those clownfish who change their sex if there's too many males in the group. It's an act of necessity. My point is, if you're now a grown woman who used to fulfill the role of fake boy, you probably play healers now. One of the best things about Girlsense was its complete and utter lack of paywall. There are plenty of product integrations and sponsors to keep as much money flowing into the site as possible, but there was absolutely nothing in the way of premium tier memberships, subscriptions, or microtransactions. Every user could access any feature, and the only thing you needed to reach that top tier of in-game capital and popularity was enough skill and patience. This was both absolutely incredible and absolutely the reason the site no longer exists. This wasn't to say that the site was devoid of the hierarchies that tended to spring up in kids' virtual worlds. The key difference, however, is that these barriers weren't locked by financial status and parental willingness to shell out for cash. Any user is equally able to achieve fame and huge amounts of in-game currency if they were knowledgeable about the site's economy and dedicated enough to learn how to create trendy items. Let me give you a quick walkthrough on how exactly people manage to create advanced garments using these limited tools. First, you select your base garment. This skirt item was particularly likely to be appropriated into other types of clothes, but you could use any image that captured the necessary surface area of the garment you wanted to make. You then resize it until it appropriately covers the surface that you need. The second step after this was usually to adjust the color to a monochrome or near monochrome, often black or white depending on which was the major accent or base color in the design. After this began the masking step, in which you cut the garment using a pen tool-like function into whatever shape that you need. Knowledge about masking set the top-tier Girlsense users apart from the normie players. Once you knew how to use the masking tool, the limited options for garments became a non-issue. However, this feature was a little too complex for a lot of younger users and teens who are less creatively or technically inclined. If the site remained open a few more years, I would have been so rich in Girlsense, I just know it. But unfortunately, it closed before I gained any workable knowledge of graphic design. This next step I consider the most jaw-dropping when done well, and that is creating patterns, details, and highlight and shadow by using the limited selection of shape stamps. High-quality work with this involves dozens or hundreds of tiny stamps in gradually shifting colors. The hair in particular is where this really stands out because the level of detailed shading on these items makes it almost unbelievable that hair was not included in the design studio templates. After this, the process is usually complete, although it may restart if you're making more complex and multi-layered garments. I hope it's clear why this was considered the magnum opus of the site. The only thing stopping you from creating the coolest thing to have ever been made on Girlsense.com was your own creativity and skill. A lot of kids found this creation tool to be engaging, inspiring, and challenging, and I could see that it could easily be a gateway into real graphic design. This tool in particular and the economy built around it, I think, is a big part of why it was so adored and continues to be missed. A banner sprung up letting users know of the site's imminent closure on July 18, 2012. After that date, the remains of the site were only its signature pink polka dot striped background with the following message. A message from the Girlsense team. Due to circumstances beyond our control, Girlsense must close. This decision was made with a lot of consideration for our amazing fans, people just like you. Given a change in resources, we could no longer service the community with the quality and diligence we were proud to maintain, and that you, our loyal followers, have come to expect from us. We have received an overwhelming response and would like to thank you for your passion and commitment to the community. In answer to many of your questions, please be aware that Girlsense fashions, e-boutiques, and account information will no longer be accessible. In addition, any G-Sense you may have learned will no longer be applicable. We have enjoyed every minute of providing you with this fun, fashion-forward site. We thank you again for being a valued part of the Girlsense community, and we wish you the best of luck. The site's investors backed out after realizing the unprofitable reality of the website, and the creators made the decision to shut the project down rather than continue it with a paywall. I honestly think this was a very noble decision. Instead of letting the game destroy its legacy trying to maximize profitability, Girlsense ducked out with dignity. The site's closure message remained up until April 2019, and afterwards, the Girlsense.com URL leads to a different IAC property, Gaming Wonderland, which sadly hosts none of the flagship games from Girlsense. While I miss Girlsense immensely, and there is nothing that can replace it, I'm saying nothing, I really respect its decision to end when it did. The The creators intelligently realized that something about the game would be fundamentally broken by creating a hierarchy of paid and unpaid players. Instead of wringing every last buck out of the site, they chose to keep a good thing a good thing. The sad reality is that a good thing is now a gone thing, and the odds of revival are slim. No rewritten project exists for the site, and much of the site's fundamental features are now both missing and obsolete. Maybe there's a chance that some devs could leak the source files and some dedicated fans could get it up and running again, but I don't think this is likely. In retrospect, Girlsense was easily my favorite of the social games I played as a kid, and that's due to the sheer amount of creative expression that was possible via the tools. However, Girlsense wasn't without its problems. Let's get into them now. When you take a look at the site map, you'll see several features with the word moderated appended to the end. Of course, this is to be expected. How can you have a safe game for kids without a bit of supervision? But wait, some of these features are social, and they don't have that little moderated tag. What's with that? How come this auction chat doesn't have it? Oh no. Oh no. The site map describes the auction chat as using whitelist technology, which indicates to me that it used the same word bank style of chat filter that BarbieGirls.com used for Super B chat. Unlike Barbie Girl's notorious restrictiveness, the Girlsense auction chat was unfathomably liberal at times in its word allowances. Because of this, the auction chat rooms regularly slid into complete debauchery. Just about every other aspect of the site was successfully safe for kids, but for some reason they couldn't prevent these auction chats from devolving into relentless bullying, graphic public cybering, and other overt site rule violations. While there's little footage of the more extreme end of the graphic content, as these kids who played Girlsense didn't want that on their YouTube channels, there are allusions to it, like this tutorial by a user called Girlsense Channel, which shows how to disable chat in order to avoid seeing offensive or cruel messages. The auction chats weren't the only spaces on Girlsense that were bizarrely unmoderated and over-permissive. The comments on boutique pages shared a similar issue, with phrases that can and should be auto-banned on sites for children remaining published and uncensored. Moderation issues also existed on the opposite end in a more typical kids game fashion. There was a very mid-aughts sensibility into what topics qualified as appropriate, and LGBT topics were considered off-limits. This was despite a huge amount of the site's user-generated content being focused on heterosexual romance. Girlsense fundamentally existed as an entity to make money. While I'm sure there were some powerful creative visionaries behind the project, it simply wouldn't exist if early 2000s G-Tech Limited hadn't said to themselves, "We have got to tap into this preteen girl market." As such, they weren't willing to try anything that might be labeled brave or progressive for fear of alienating any parents that might take advantage of some of these wonderful product integrations. This was further confounded by the fact that at the time, LGBT labels were used more frequently by kids as slurs than as actual proclamations of identity. Unfortunately, this meant that young gay kids couldn't talk about their crushes from school like everybody else, with their attraction being treated as inherently explicit. No one type of moderation will ever make everyone happy, but I think it's pretty clear that Girlsense had some issues balancing this aspect of the site. The next issue was weak aesthetic branding. I have to admit it, Girlsense was kind of ugly. One thing you might notice about Girlsense is that it doesn't really have any one particular style, or rather, it overtly introduces separate and clashing styles and throws them all together on one page. I'm not exactly sure how to explain why this is. Maybe they used a bunch of stock images to populate their graphics, or maybe they sourced art from a bunch of different teams. But the final result is a site that has a real problem with a lack of visual cohesiveness. The art style that I consider to actually be the Girlsense art style employed in their fashion design studio and flagship games is also pretty weak. Girlsense aims for a semi-realistic style that lands firmly in the uncanny valley for me. A lot of these art assets look like traced stock images and don't really have the aspect of snappy stylization that other games for girls tend to have. The Makeup Girl game and cartoon dolls were particularly unsettling. Even sites for general audiences or for boys tended to have a stronger sense of visual unity than the extremely mishmashed graphics found on Girlsense. Nearly every single art asset on Girlsense looks like it was created by someone different with no instruction given to create a cohesive visual brand. The lack of consideration to art assets as demonstrated by Girlsense works to the detriment of the site's impression on its viewers. It's a superficial issue, but in a game all about superficiality, that stuff's important. The next problem was content bloat. As our beloved Dever puts it, there is more to do here than on any other site. But this doesn't always work to the site's benefit. The highly intentional, well-considered elements of the game are well-remembered and beloved for a reason. I mean, their flagship game was essentially Adobe Illustrator Junior. But this is a big sitemap and not all elements can get the same level of attention and care. Basically, there is a lot of junk on Girlsense.com. From clumsy product integrations, to several features ripped directly from KiddoNet properties with no alteration, to a huge list of third-party Flash games that clash with the site's already inconsistent design. Something I found peculiar about this site's games is that the staples of Flash girl gaming, dress-up and makeover games, are largely absent besides the site's handful of original offerings. This was a departure from most other similar sites, which had a mixture of gender-neutral and feminine-oriented games. This isn't the biggest negative, but I did find it strange that a site themed entirely around fashion and fashion design had a games page that looked like Armor Games but worse. The content bloat issue became worse after the acquisition by IAC, who proceeded to promote their questionable downloads like Spiley Central and Cursor Mania. Girlsense tried to be everything when it didn't need to be, and these less memorable aspects of the site have largely been forgotten. However, there weren't any issues that really contributed to the site's downfall like this next and last one. Unprofitability. In a way, I think of Girlsense's free-to-play years as a gift to the general culture by Starnet Interactive. There was definitely an air of soulless corporateness to Girlsense's entire existence, and yet so much less compared to a more artistically coherent property that actively extorts money from children. Post-2007, Girlsense chose to forego direct profitability to something a little more speculative, hoping that product integrations and ad revenue could keep the site above water. This was not the case. Girlsense was a huge hit with several million users, none of which were providing any money to the site beyond their ad revenue and whatever sales could be attributed to ads. It seriously pains me to list the free-to-play model as a problem with this site at all, because it was one of the things that made Girlsense stand apart from the far more exploitative kids' virtual worlds. But unfortunately, it seems like these sites can't continue existing without some level of financial exploitation of its users. It's hard to say whether it was unprofitable because the site was truly losing money, or just because it wasn't promising to infinitely generate more and more and more profit, which in corporate world is often treated as the same thing. Girlsense was both incredibly popular and is extremely missed. Despite the lack of new media on the topic, old videos and blog posts still sporadically receive comments from ex-players who still check in to see if the website has been brought back. Honestly, in retrospect, Girlsense was incredibly weird. It had a lot of bizarreness and lack of consideration in its execution that would usually turn me away, but the good aspects were so remarkably good that I can only look back at the website fondly. I was automatically drawn to games and sites that offered a high degree of creative expression, and Girlsense embodied that perfectly. The things able to be created with these limited tools were beyond belief. It's really a shame that I can't try them out now because I really want to know what I would be capable of 12 years after I was most active. I've tried to consider how this website could be resurrected in a profitable manner, and I honestly think the most viable way that the game could thrive in 2022 would be to first convert to mobile, and second, revert to the original subscription model. $20 a year was kind of a ripoff for the original Girlsense with its highly limited content, but Golden Age Girlsense was honestly worth $20 a year or more. This would adjust to about $30 considering 18 years of inflation, or $250 per month. And honestly, I would jump at the opportunity to play Girlsense for a low monthly fee like that. I think the way to monetize the site without breaking the aspect of anybody being able to make it if they try hard enough would be to not create any features that puts players substantially further ahead if they choose to pay. I understand that the profit model of mobile games is based on whales, so I think the easiest and most straightforward option here would just be to add an option to pay for Gsense. Anybody can still grind for them, but whales can choose to pay to reach the same status as a person who knows how to make really cool hair. An official new Girlsense would have an audience problem. Their target audience would be splintered between the zillennials who grew up with the game and kids who kids' mobile apps are generally engineered for. My suggested resolution to this would be to make a teen and adult-oriented Girlsense classic that is essentially a direct recreation of the first game, along with a kid-oriented Girlsense Junior, which is more updated, modernized, and for a younger audience. That way the people who grew up with the game could get their nostalgia fix, while little kids could engage with the game in a way that's a little more on their level. The more I think about it, the more I believe this dual app approach would really be necessary, because you can't really cater to one without alienating the other. If my own reaction to visiting Modern Girls Go games is anything to go by, adults would really hate playing a Girlsense designed to appeal to little kids. Little kids, on the other hand, are frequently repulsed by the idea of playing with anything that they've deemed old. Don't get your hopes up at my speculation. This is really all just a pipe dream. However, I do genuinely think it's something that could work. So folks from IAC, if you're watching this, now's your sign. It's time to remake Girlsense. Do it. You can do it. I really hope I didn't seem too harsh about the site because despite its quirks and oddities and tendency to slip into some dark places, my memories and feelings toward the site are truly warm and positive, and again, I would jump at the chance to play it again. Unlike some other kids games that I think I would basically just walk through once to indulge in the nostalgia and then put it away until I feel compelled to do that again, I think I could actually get into Girlsense as an adult. The advanced use of the tools are no longer an alien concept for me, and I think my boutique would be insane. I don't have my hopes up though. Girlsense will probably remain to be a fond memory for those who played it, and nothing more. Thanks for joining me on my look back at Girlsense.com. Were your memories as rosy as mine, or were you a victim of the under-moderated social features? Or somewhere in between? Leave me a comment letting me know. There are quite a few things I could do for my next upload, and I think I won't tie myself down quite yet. In the meantime, leave a comment if you think there's a topic that you'd like me to cover, and of course, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.